Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Crash and Ride podcast. I'm Patrick Ferguson. I'm your host. Today's guest is Richard Salino. He's a recording engineer and drummer who lives in Brooklyn, New York. He works at Studio G. He used to be my studio partner a million years ago, back when he lived in Athens, Georgia. Richard's a cancer survivor. He woke up one day with a brain tumor, and we talk about his journey through being diagnosed with cancer and being treated and how his life's going now. This is going to be kind of a fast and dirty intro. I'm currently on tour with Pinky Doodle Poodle. We just played Wilmington, North Carolina last night. We've got a few more dates on this run coming up, but I'm in a stranger's house in their music room, surrounded by their instruments, recording this. I do take my recording interface on the road with me a lot in case I run into someone I want to interview. So, speaking of Pinky Doodle Poodle, we got some more dates coming up. On Thursday, July 4th, we're playing Franklin, North Carolina at Altered Frequencies for Independence Day. And then Friday, July 5th, we're playing in Nashville, Tennessee at the Cobra. We're back in Athens, Georgia on Saturday, July 6th. We're playing the Georgia Theater Rooftop. Wednesday, July 10th, we're in Dallas, Texas at Three Links. Thursday, July 11th, we're in Austin, Texas at the Empire Control Room. Saturday, July 13th, we're in Ruston, Louisiana at the Sundown Tavern. We're back in Athens, Georgia again on January 19th at the Slop Fest at Little Kings. That's a really fun festival where a bunch of garage punk and noise rock bands play. And, man, you should come to town for that if you haven't made plans already. And then on Saturday, July 20th, we're in Columbia, South Carolina at the Art Bar. I have a run of dates in the fall with Chuck Leavell from the Rolling Stones and Mike Mills from REM and Bobby McDuffie, one of the world's premier concert violinists. I'll be playing drums for them. We're going to do a short tour of the Southeast. I'll have more dates on my website, and also I'll announce them here as those dates get closer. I got a whole bunch of news about different stuff, some of which I can announce now and some of which you'll just have to tune in next week for. One of the big things is Crash and Ride is now available on Spotify. So if you've been listening on another podcast player, but you prefer to listen on Spotify, search Spotify for Crash and Ride, and you'll find the podcast. Speaking of Spotify, make sure you check our Facebook page for Crash and Ride for links to a Spotify playlist I'm going to put up every time we release an episode. There'll be some songs by whoever I interview each week, plus bands Pinky Doodle Poodle has played with on tour, or any other bands I feel like you should know about. If it seems like I'm rushing through this, it's because I'm rushing through this. As soon as I finish these announcements, I get to go to the beach. So real quick, here's a message from our sponsors. Crash and Ride is brought to you in part by Greer Amplification. Greer Amps builds the best boutique effects pedals available. If you're looking for an overdrive, boost, fuzz, compressor, or tremolo that is rugged, road-tested, and at home on stage, in the studio, or in your living room, Greer has a pedal for you. Nick and his staff strive to build the best products around with the best tone you've ever heard. They believe in their products, and they stand behind them too, backing each one up with a lifetime warranty to the original owner. Each Greer Amps product is hand-built in Athens, Georgia, USA. Go to www.greeramps.com or visit your local music retailer today. Crash and Ride is also brought to you in part by Jittery Joe's, a local coffee roaster in Athens, Georgia. They've created a special espresso blend named after the podcast. You'll soon be able to get Crash and Ride Espresso from their web store or from our web store once I get the time to sit down and actually make the dang thing. Or you can go to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/crashandride and sign up for the $35 a month sponsorship level. For that, you get to support the program, and I'll also send you a can of Crash and Ride Espresso every month. Remember, if you're struggling with thoughts of self-harm and you need somebody to talk to, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 24/7, it's free, it's confidential, it's staffed by trained volunteers. They can talk you through your crisis. 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. Hey, folks, things have been going great lately. I'm really grateful for all the support I've gotten, all the positive feedback, and some of the negative feedback. It's helpful. So keep listening to the show. Stay in touch. crashandride@protonmail.com is our email address. That's all the announcements I have, so let's jump into our interview with Richard Salino. All right, I'm here with Richard Salino, audio engineer at Studio G in Brooklyn, New York. Also a freelance audio engineer, live engineer, a fine drummer. Are you still playing drums much, Richard?
I am. I'm not really playing out very much, but I do play. Some of the people at the studio and myself have been getting together to do some I don't really know what it is yet. It hasn't turned into anything official. I don't consider myself a great musician by any stretch of the imagination, and I do consider the people that I'm playing with to be great musicians. And that was quite intimidating at the beginning. But it's been, I don't know, 6 or 8 months that we've been doing this. It's been a while. And so that's all gone now, and it's just fun. And yeah.
So while you may not consider yourself a great musician, I consider you to be one of the best audio engineers you are the best audio engineer I've ever worked with.
Oh, stop.
And our relationship began when I was a house engineer at Studio 1093 in Athens, Georgia, and you were moving up from Florida, as I recall.
Yeah.
And you contacted me and said, "I want to. My girlfriend we're moving to Athens, and I want to work as an audio engineer." And as I recall, I said, "Yeah, don't."
Yeah, that was. Yeah,
I was so supportive. I was like, nobody here is making a living except David Barbie.
You weren't wrong.
Yeah.
It's the nature of this, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then, so you came anyway, and you volunteered to work as an intern with me, which was hilarious because the first project we really worked on together was with Anthony Aparo and the rest of the band Mr. Mustache. And we actually Anthony, when I interviewed him, I think he was episode 6. Not positive. I think that was the episode I interviewed him on. And I talked to him about how I was busily mixing away on that project. And at some point I got ear fatigue and brain fatigue. And you said, "How about I slide in here for a minute?" You made the mix immeasurably better. I can remember the moment. I think I laid down on the couch for like a 10-minute nap and woke up and was like, "Oh, well, okay."
Yeah, that was a fun time. That was a period of a lot of work being done in a very quick fashion.
Right. We did a couple of projects like that. There was another project that we remixed an entire record in a weekend.
Yep.
It was 12 tracks.
That was all new to me, and that was something that I didn't know. So I started engineering out of necessity. It wasn't something that I had planned on doing with my life. But I think, like most people, I was playing in a band, and we didn't have any money, and we wanted to record. And I foolishly offered to record the band. Didn't really know what that meant, but it grew from that. And I had my own studio in Florida. And before meeting you and working at 1093 with you, I'd never worked with another engineer. I taught myself everything through reading and listening and asking questions of anyone I could find. But I'd never been in a room with someone else engineering. So the time aspect, when you own your own place and you're not very competent and you don't really know how records are made, you spend a lot of time messing around on things that aren't that important. And you tend to, I know I did anyway, I spent far too long on everything.
Right.
And my cats are knocking stuff over. Sorry.
Mine is asleep somewhere, waiting for me to step on.
Must be nice.
Yeah.
Must be nice.
He likes to lie in the pathway of places where I go in the house and then get the sympathy points of being stepped on. So.
Yeah. So I went from this period of having as much time as I wanted to spend, and in fact, looking back on it, ruining some things in the process, and certainly people were confused as to why it was taking me so long to mix their one song or whatever it was I was working on, to meeting you and working at 1093, and you were like, "Well, we have a day to do these 10 songs." And I'm like, "Excuse me?"
Right.
And then when do we do the other 10? That, like, what?
Right.
So that was
the sort of fact that 1093 was an enormous facility. Like, it was a big room, and it took X dollars just to unlock the door. Meant that a lot of times we were constrained by other people's budgets to get things done as rapidly as possible.
Yeah,
but we did good work there. And then so I quickly reevaluated the whole, like, Richard is my intern to Richard is my partner, because that was the only sensible thing to do. And then to had to regretfully say goodbye when you decided to go to New York and do this for real.
Yeah. That was a tough decision. But like you said, in passing, Athens is not a big place, and the people who are doing the work there are doing the work there, and
doing great work.
They're fantastic. The quality and density of talent in Athens is something that I don't think a lot of people realize. And it's easy to take it for granted. Yeah.
I mean, like, at different times in my life, I've contemplated moving to other cities just because of the opportunities that are available to my wife. And I check into the music scene in those other cities, and I'm like, are there any bands here that don't play Huey Lewis covers?
Right.
And oftentimes the answer is no, not really. Which is kind of astonishing. So you've been in New York for how long now?
Just over 5 years.
And you've worked on a bunch of records up there.
I have. There's some stuff on my website that if anyone wants to listen to things that I've done, that would be where I would direct them. It's just myname.com.
Salino spelled Salino. So Richard Salino.com.
Yeah. And there's some stuff on there, and you can certainly listen to my work. But the moments that have really meant a lot to me came during other people's sessions. Mm-hmm. And, the first few months of living up here, I met people who, the talent of people who were coming through and on a regular basis it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And there are just a lot of moments of meeting people and watching people work when I was not the one doing the work, that really taught me a lot, and I'm really grateful for. That's been my biggest positive experience living in New York, is just being surrounded by people who are incredibly talented, and not, I don't say that lightly, but watching people work and not even being able to understand what it is they're doing while I'm watching them do it. Let alone think that I could do it somehow. It's the kind of thing where it doesn't make sense. I'm speaking from an engineering point of view, watching people use the same gear that I use, watching people turn the knobs in the same direction that I turn the knobs, but somehow what's coming out of the speakers is completely different. And, talking about the speed difference between working in Florida and then coming to Athens, the first time I saw a tracking session at Studio G, and before anyone came into the control room, the mix was already better than anything I'd ever done. That type of thing, like the sounds that exist instantly, because it needs to be that way.
Right. There's not a lot of time to fiddle with mic placement and incoming EQ and compression levels. You just got to get it done.
Man, there's none of that, because people are even. I shouldn't say there's none of that, but it's different to what I was used to, and it comes from people working in the same room with the same gear over and over and over again, and understanding, this is what happens when I put this microphone here in front of this instrument and in this room, in this position, and through this piece of gear, et cetera. Like when you're as busy as people up here are, they kind of fall into ways of working that they know will work. And that's not to say that people don't experiment, but the starting point has to be so far ahead of what I think a lot of people who have never been in that environment expect, that it's pretty mind-blowing. The people who I respect, who I watch work, and who really blow my mind, the one thing that they all have in common is that they don't wait to do anything. There's no standing on ceremony in terms of processing or whatever it is. The entire thing is, I want this to come out of the speakers, and whatever it takes to make that happen, I'm going to do. And that goes for the musician, that goes for the engineer, it goes for everybody involved in the process. And there's a fearlessness that these great people have because they have the experience and the knowledge and the taste, whatever it is. And they just do it. And it's pretty incredible to watch.
Yeah. So you grew up in in Boca Raton. Is that South or Central Florida? I'm not even sure.
It's South Florida. It's about an hour north of Miami.
Were you born there?
I was not. I was born in England. I moved to Florida when I was about 3, and I lived there for 20 years.
Were both your parents English?
My mom was born in California and likes to remind everyone of that whenever anyone asks. My dad was born in England. If you were to hear the two of them talk, I think most people assume the opposite, which always kind of makes me laugh a little bit.
Yeah, I remember meeting your parents many years ago and thinking that your mother was the English one.
Yep. She lived in England for 30 years or so.
What did your folks do?
Growing up, my dad owned a pool cleaning business, and my mom was a teacher.
So you were fairly like middle class, or even closer to working class kid. And Boca Raton's not really a working class area of the country.
No, it's not. I went to a private school. My parents, I'm an only child, and my parents definitely put me first growing up. I'm very grateful for that. And my mom worked at the school that I went to so that tuition was free.
That's good.
Yeah. And my dad worked his ass off. I don't think I've seen anyone work as hard as my parents did. And that taught me a lot, for sure.
The sort of work ethic I've seen you display in the studio is beginning to sort of become a little clearer about where it came from. Yeah.
My mom she would take me to school in the morning and be with me all day. She was my teacher for a short period, but most of the time during my schooling, she was not actually my teacher. But we would go to school together, and then she would be there, long after everyone left, as would the other teachers. It wasn't just her, but, teachers work so hard and are very underappreciated. And, she was cleaning toilets. She was the janitor. She was doing everything. And Boca Raton, as you said, is quite an affluent place, and this was a private school, and a lot of the people who went to the school were very well off, and not everybody, but a lot of people were. And that was certainly an interesting environment to grow up in. I don't think I really noticed it too much until I got older, but there were certainly some things when I got into high school and driving became a thing. People would be given brand new cars, for example, when they learn to drive. And that's just a different life experience.
And when did you start playing music?
As early as I can really remember. I think I was about 6 when I got a drum set.
Wow. Were your parents music fans?
Yes, very, very deeply. My earliest memory, or one of my earliest memories, is laying on the floor in the condo that we moved into when we first moved to Florida, watching a VHS tape of the Nebworth concerts that were in the early 90s in England. And I spent a lot of time watching videos of concerts, and my parents took me to a lot of concerts when I was probably too young to go to them.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw the Rolling Stones when I was 6 or 7, something like that. I remember my mom being horrified because this was at the time of things were a little different, and there was a point at which a lady flashed the kind of like jumbotron thing, and my mom was horrified that this was a thing that I had seen, but the going to a Rolling Stones show when you're like 6 or 7 is pretty life changing.
What were the bands on the Nebworth tapes that you watched?
Eric Clapton was on there. Phil Collins was on there. The reason I started playing drums was watching Phil Collins, which I don't think is a unique experience. Status Quo was a thing.
Yeah.
A lot of things that I don't really listen to now. Cliff Richard was on there. Rod Stewart, I believe. A lot of those types of things.
Your parents seemed like they had a pretty deep interest in the whole British invasion thing.
Yeah, it's been interesting because there's a lot of gaps in my musical knowledge. I don't know a lot of kind of Motown and early American music because it was never something that I grew up listening to, but I know a lot of the classic English bands.
Seems like you had a pretty good childhood. I mean, unlike most of my guests who come in here and say, well, my childhood was a disaster. It seems like your parents were attentive. And
I had the best childhood. I wouldn't change a thing about it.
And at some point, though, you had this dermatological thing on your arm, as I recall.
Yeah, that was shortly after we met. I don't remember how long after, but I had a cancerous mole removed from my arm.
You say mole. I remember seeing the scar and being like, whoa, dude, what got after you? It was a really big, they took a lot of skin away.
Yeah, they did. They didn't do a great job, if I'm honest. So my first experience with skin cancer was actually 13. Again, growing up in Florida, I had
being English.
I'm not exactly built to be in the sun.
Right.
And I like to be in the sun. And even when I wore sunscreen, I would burn, and there wasn't much to do about it. So I wound up with melanoma when I was 13. I had a melanoma removed from my back. And the one on my arm, I was 23, so that was 10 years later. And each time they removed these things, and they were both stage 1A, which is the most treatable, the least concerning. And I asked, do I need to do anything? Is there anything further that we need to do? No, it's fine. Just go see the dermatologist every 6 months or every year, whatever it was at the time. Keep getting checked and get things biopsied as need be, but that's all you need to worry about.
Mm-hmm. So you moved to Brooklyn and start your career there at Studio G, and you got engaged to Genevieve, your now wife.
Yep.
And then you're standing on a subway platform one day.
Yeah. So the timeline of events was, looking back on it, was kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
At the time, I was assisting Tony Mamoni, who's one of the owners at Studio G. I was assisting him full time, and we were very busy. I did a string of it was about a month, but 35 days or so, where it was averaging 12 to 15 hours a day. There were a couple records that we were working on, and it was a lot of work. And I started to feel a little funny, and I wasn't sure why, but I put it down to being tired and drinking too much coffee and stress and all the things that people try to explain why they don't feel right.
Tell me about what kind of funny, though? Like what were your symptoms?
It's really hard to explain because I was asked to explain this when I was diagnosed, and I still don't know how to explain it, but it was primarily vision related. And it was the kind of thing where things visually were in a different place to where they were physically for me. So I would look at something and try to touch it, and it would be close, but not quite right. And I had some kind of not dizzy spells, not vertigo per se, but kind of felt like I was maybe not walking quite right, and just minor little things that being exhausted would explain, but it wasn't.
Yeah, so you're putting in 10, 12-hour days with Tony, someone we both admire greatly, and so you're not going to say, no, I think I need to go get some rest. You're just plugging away.
And it's not the kind of thing you do. I mean, the nature of this job is that you do whatever you're asked, and whatever, not necessarily what you're asked by a person, but whatever the project is asking of you.
Right.
You know, we're responsible for creating art, for presenting someone else's art, basically. And it's a tremendous responsibility. A lot of people don't make records very often or at all. I'm lucky to get to make them all the time. So I'm going to have another record, but you may not. So, you know, it means a lot to me that someone would trust me with their art. And if they want to keep working, I'm going to keep working.
Right.
If you have the energy to put into your art, then I can find it in me to do that as well. And
right.
At the time, I was doing a lot of drum editing on this particular project. So Tony would be tracking, and I would be either in the same room with headphones or in a different room editing drums on a laptop, and the kind of thing. He would be tracking a song and then give it to me, and then I'd give it back, and he'd overdub on that. And that was the process. So it was a lot of staring at a computer and a lot of really tedious concentration, and it wasn't particularly fun or creative. So I wasn't surprised that I wasn't feeling well. I was very tired. I was, staring at a screen, and none of the vision related things seemed to be out of the ordinary for someone doing what I was doing.
Right. Under stress.
Yeah. And, being responsible for editing drums, for example, it's everything else is built on that. So you don't get that right, everything else is wrong.
Right. So people who don't know the recording process, you track drums first. They're the foundation of every recording session, or 95% of recording sessions. Drums go down first, and once drums are right, you can lay everything else in on top of it. They're the bones of the session.
Generally.
Yeah. And so you're splicing, you're editing these drum sessions so that they're, tempo correct, dynamics correct, and handing them back to Tony, the producer, so that they can proceed with the session. So this is not like a small amount of responsibility.
No, and there were time constraints as well because
it's New York.
Yeah, and we have this much time booked in the studio. So if the tracks aren't ready to overdub on, like if the drums aren't edited, everyone's waiting on me. And this wasn't that long into me being at the studio. I think I'd been there a year or so at this point.
Right. I guess it's probably worth mentioning that, just to briefly digress, the dynamic that you and I had as a working team was that you were largely, I don't want to say invisible, but not intrusive in the sessions. Like, I can speak from the experience of having worked with you that I could always count on you having gotten whatever you needed to do done, but you were never like centering yourself in the session and saying, here are what my needs are. So I can sort of picture you in this other high pressure situation, just being sort of Johnny on the spot, but not ever saying, I'm tired, I need a rest, I need a break, because it's not how you are.
Well, there's that. Thank you. I strive for that, so thank you. But also, Tony is not a young man. Tony has been doing this for longer than I've been alive. And once again, if he can do it, I can do it.
Right.
And I'm certainly not going to be the one to say, hey, man, I've been working a while. You think we should maybe, I'm not going to do that. I certainly wanted to. But that's not the way it works. And here's this person who's, much more experienced and much older than I am, and he's able to make this work. So can I. And so I ignored all of the warning signs that my body was giving me, basically.
Right.
And
then
one day it got really bad. One day, and I was in the bathroom, and I thought I was going to fall over, and I didn't. But I kind of had a kind of minor panic attack because I wasn't sure what was going on, and I didn't feel right, but I didn't know why, and all these things. So I walked over to our tech's office. Our tech is Mike Rippey. He's a fantastic tech and a wonderful human who I now call a good friend. And I told him I wasn't feeling right, and he said, "Well, do you want me to call you an ambulance?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I need to do that." So he called me an ambulance. We both went downstairs and waited for the ambulance to show up. And I started feeling better. I ended up taking a ride to the hospital. They checked me out at the ER, and they couldn't find anything wrong. They let me go. They kind of did the basics. They did my vital signs and all that stuff, and right. They asked me what I was doing and any reason you might feel this way. And I told them what I just told you about my schedule, and they were like, "Well, that's probably what it is. You should really sleep and maybe don't drink so much coffee." And that being said, I did give them my medical history, which included the 2 melanoma removals, and nobody really thought anything of it. And they told me that they referred me to a neurologist, and said that if I wanted to, I could go and see a neurologist if I was concerned. And these symptoms kept happening, and I ended up going to the neurologist, and they basically did the same thing. They talked to me, and they said, "Well, you're working a lot, and this isn't surprising, but it's probably nothing. We could scan you, but you've got a really high copay, and
for God's
it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000s. So, you're young. You're probably just overworked. It's stressful. It's New York, so you probably don't need to spend a couple grand to be told that everything's fine." So I went on my merry way. And that was, I think, January or February of 2016, something around then. Yeah. In April, I took a trip up to Portland, Maine, with my wife, girlfriend at the time. And on the 10th, I proposed. And on the 11th, we got back to Brooklyn on the 10th. The 11th, I went into the studio in the morning, and I was on my way to meet Genevieve to get the ring that I had given her resized because it didn't fit. And I was on my way on the subway, and I was transferring trains and collapsed on the platform. I didn't know what had happened, and I thought, given the way that I was feeling and what I knew about medicine in general, I thought I'd had a stroke. The left side of my body went numb. I couldn't really think straight. I couldn't function. I didn't know what had happened, but I thought I had had a stroke.
That you were experiencing those symptoms after passing out or before?
I never lost consciousness. I just got very, very confused. I remember taking all of my belongings out of my pocket. So I had my wallet, my phone, keys, all of those things. And I'm standing on the subway platform. It's about 5. It's rush hour. There are literally hundreds of people around me. And I'm standing on the subway platform, taking all of my things out of my pocket, but not understanding why I'm doing it. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember doing it, but I also remember looking at my hands and seeing all of my belongings in my hands and not understanding why. And eventually I got my wits about me, and I tried to walk. They have phones in the subway stations that you can call for help. And I tried to make my way to one of these phones, and I couldn't walk up the stairs. And again, this is rush hour, and there's people streaming past me. There's hundreds of people, and the beauty of New York is that no one pays any attention.
Right.
I'm sure that people thought that I was on drugs or something. But whatever it was, nobody gave me the time of day, which it is what it is.
Yeah.
Finally, I convinced a stranger to help me up the stairs, and he got me to the phone. And then he basically was like, "All right, you good? Cool," and walked away. I tried calling for help on the phone. Whoever was on the other end said that someone would be there shortly. I waited about 15 minutes. Nobody showed up. And at that point, I was kind of feeling better. I ended up getting back on the train. I went into Manhattan. And as I'm on the train, I'm like, all right, something is seriously wrong with me. This is not normal. This is not stress. This is not being tired. I've been those things before. This is not that. So I got out of the train, and I called Genevieve, and I said, I'm going to the hospital.
What are some of the options that you thought might be wrong with you while you were on the train? That seems like a moment of profound introspection, like what is happening to me?
I was still fully in stroke mode. I definitely thought that I had a minor stroke,
right?
Brought on by stress or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. So you're confused.
Yeah, very
frightened.
Yeah. It was terrifying. And it's the moment of being so alone, surrounded by people. I mean, I was crammed into a subway car. I could barely move. If I had passed out, I wouldn't have fallen over. That type of thing. And yet I had nobody.
This is so in keeping with my experience with dealing with you at work, in the studio, is that like you're so self-sufficient that you're absolutely surrounded by 100 people, and yet you're like, I have to deal with this on my own. Which is
it's a fault of mine.
The thing I used to tell people about you and I as a studio team is that you had this boundless technical knowledge and an absolutely golden set of ears. And my primary skill as a person in the studio, I don't even call myself a producer, but I feel like I'm flattering myself when I do, is that I'm able to coax good performances out of people, but also kind of divine their intent. So I always used to tell people, Richard reads manuals and I read minds.
Yeah, I think that was a very accurate observation that you made back then. And I think it still holds true for me.
Yeah, but it's like sort of part of the kind of like the person I think of when I think of you is that you're like, well, I got to muscle my way through this because I can't be a burden on these people around me by saying, help me, I'm sick.
That makes it sound like, I don't know. I didn't have a choice in the matter is the way that I look at it. I don't see it as any kind of, positive or negative character trait or anything like that. It's just that was the nature of it. What was I going to do? There wasn't, this was before there was cell phone service in all of the subway stations. Now every station has cell phone and Wi-Fi service. So, this was before that. And my options were I can get out of the station in Brooklyn and it's actually in Queens, but get out of the station in Queens, or I can go meet my fiance and deal with this with her. And that was the decision that I made. And so I got back on the train. I went into Manhattan. I got out of the station, and I told her that I was going to the hospital, and she was close by, so she ended up meeting me, and we took an Uber to the hospital because ambulances are expensive. It was rush hour. So
I'm so fed up with for-profit healthcare, man. I could scream like every day.
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt this, but I'm just so ready.
It's a horrible thing.
It really is.
And So yeah, we took an Uber to the emergency room, and finally they thought, well, maybe we should scan this person. They did an X-ray and then subsequent scans, and they told me I had a brain tumor.
What was that moment like?
I don't even know how to explain what that felt like.
Yeah.
That period of time is a bit of a blur for me. But I remember I was sitting in the ER, and they gave us a room that, so for those of you who haven't been to an ER, you go in, you go through triage. They kind of figure out what's wrong with you on a surface level, and then they decide what they're going to do with you. And if it's something minor, at least in New York, they will give you, a space in the hallway, or some low priority space. If it's something serious, you get a room, and they gave me a room, and at that point I knew that something wasn't quite right. The time I had been in the ER before, they just kind of looked at me, and they talked to me out in the hall, and they were, go home, you're fine. This was not that. And so Genevieve and I are waiting in this room in the ER, and a nurse came in, and she said, "You have a brain tumor." And it was very matter of fact. There was no other information.
It wasn't a doctor.
What's that?
It was a nurse, not a doctor.
It was a nurse, yeah. And she came in and she said, "You have a brain tumor." And I said, "Okay, what does that mean? Am I going to die?" I remember asking that. I remember asking if I was going to make it through the night. I just had no idea what that meant. And her response to my questions was, "I can't speak to that." Those were her literal words. "I cannot speak to that." Which, when you're asking, "Am I going to die tonight?" and someone says, "I can't tell you," that's not what you want to hear. I think almost any answer would have been better than that for me. So that was the most difficult part of the whole thing for me. I remember keeping in mind the timeline here. I got engaged the day before, which was an absolute high point of my life.
Right.
And the very next day I was being told that I had a brain tumor and I might die. And they left us. She went out of the room, and they left us to our thoughts for, felt like a long time. I don't think it was that long before someone else came in, but that felt like an eternity. And I remember just over and over.
Did you guys talk?
Oh yeah. I remember I just over and over saying I don't want to die to her. That's what I remember of that. It's just this feeling of I don't want to die. And thankfully the next person who came in was another nurse who came in to check on me, and I guess it was probably 5 minutes later. It felt like an hour, but I don't think it was that long. And it went from probably the worst bedside manner to possibly the best. He came in and he just said, I used to work in neurology, and if they thought that this was serious, you wouldn't be sitting here right now. You would be in surgery. So we don't have all the information. That's what we're going to find now. But just sit tight and, hold on. And that's what we did. And that started a series of scans, and we were up all night. They didn't have a room for us, so we were in a hallway on a gurney together. Genevieve was on the gurney with me. She has been literally by my side for this entire experience. And finally, they found us a room early that morning, and I got some sleep at that point. But it was just the next few days were a flurry of scans and doctors and examining, what was wrong with me so that they could come up with a plan for how they were going to treat it. And I ended up having, I had brain surgery that Friday, and subsequent treatments after that.
So this brain tumor is the stage 4 of one of your most likely previous melanomas that was diagnosed as 1A.
Correct.
And so they thought they got it all at some point, and it's most likely the one that was on your arm, you think? Because because the one on your back was almost 15 years prior.
It was. Yeah.
So, my grandfather died of melanoma, and it used to be that if you got to stage 4 melanoma, and I realize there's all types of melanoma, but mostly the skin cancer melanoma was a death sentence, usually 6 months.
Yep. And
somehow science has evolved to the point where they use the immunotherapy now. There's people. I think you talked to me fairly quickly after all of this.
Yep.
Because I heard about it secondhand. I think from Ethan Payne from Easter Island, and you were out of pocket because there were so many things happening to you, and I was pretty freaked out. And someone said to me, there are people who've been living with this diagnosis now for 10 or 12 years. And they're all in New York. The longest term survivors of this were all basically working out of the hospital where you were.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about immunotherapy and what that means. So they do the extraction. They get this mass out of your brain.
Yeah. So in addition to the brain tumor, I had 2 nodules on my left lung. And when they were discussing treatment plans with me, they did a biopsy of the lung tumor to confirm that it was melanoma. And if anyone is wondering, a lung biopsy is by far the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
I remember you telling me that was the worst pain and most excruciating emotional torture of your entire life. So
it wasn't particularly painful. It was definitely uncomfortable, but it wasn't the pain as much as being very, very awake during the entire thing. And it's right in front of your face, so it's kind of hard not to watch what's going on. It's not a fun experience. Anyway, so they did these things. They basically, I had my my brain surgery and I was in recovery. It's a testament to the surgeons that I was home 48 hours after I had brain surgery.
This wasn't one of those where they make you play violin or something while they're in your brain. They knocked you out, right?
Oh yeah. No, I was very out. That's the first surgery I'd ever had. It was the first anesthesia that I'd ever been under. So I went 0 to 60 on that one.
How was your anesthesia experience?
It was pretty bizarre because time doesn't exist. So I remember going under. They do the thing where you count backwards and all that stuff.
How far did you get?
I don't think I even started.
Right.
It was almost instant. And
I will say this, as a recovering person who doesn't do any drugs anymore, I'm a big fan of anesthesia, man.
I don't know if I would agree because I don't know the actual drugs. I don't remember. I remember the aftermath, which was kind of uncomfortable.
I have a drug problem and you do not. So
that's a fair point.
They asked me to count backwards from 10 and I said, they'd already given me some liquid Valium, which I was like, you guys should sell this shit in the gift shop, bro. It's so good. And they were like, count backwards from 10. And I said, should I start with 10 or 9? And there was a brief moment of silence in the ER, and they were like, start at 10. And I was like, okay. And that was the last thing I remember.
Yeah. I remember they asked me to think of a happy thing. And when I woke up, it felt like that instant, basically.
Yeah, no time passes.
No, it's very bizarre. And I was thinking of a particular place and with Genevieve, and I thought when I woke up that's where I would be. Which that was a pretty nice way to wake up. Yeah, it was a little, oh, I'm strapped into a bunch of machines and I have a headache. That's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, after the surgery, I met with an oncologist and we went over treatment options and settled on an aggressive course of immunotherapy. And what immunotherapy is, there are drugs, and I don't fully understand the way this works. I'm not a doctor, but basically, instead of the drugs treating the disease, the drugs tell your body that something's wrong, and then your body attacks the cancer. And the reason that cancer is able to thrive in the body is that your body doesn't recognize it as disease. So immunotherapy tells your body that something's not right. Go out and find whatever it is that's not right and get rid of it. And it's been a game changer for many types of cancer, but melanoma especially. And the options that they gave me were do nothing and watch and see what happens, which didn't really appeal to me. The second option was we can give you one of these two drugs, which will be somewhat effective, but also not nearly as risky. And the third option was we can give you these two drugs in combination, and it has a pretty high success rate, but it's also fairly risky. And
so two immunostimulant drugs instead of
yeah.
chemo.
So
Yeah.
I was on ipilimumab and nivolumab. Those are the two drugs, and Ipi and Nivo are the shortened versions of that. And they give them in succession at the start of the treatment protocol. It's every 2 weeks, and they gave me one dose of the combination, and it nearly killed me.
Talk to me about that.
So when it goes bad, it elicits an autoimmune response. So your body attacks itself.
Right. Like
and
multiple sclerosis or.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that it manifests is with inflammation. So I got incredibly high fevers. I was in the ER a number of times with fever of 104 and upwards. And I got hepatitis, which is inflammation of the liver. Right. And I got pneumonitis. Pneumonitis is the one that is pretty scary.
That's inflammation of the lungs, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's basically you get a cough and a very high fever, and you might have trouble breathing. It's
let's just pause for a second.
Yep.
And think about what that means. You might have trouble breathing. Sounds innocuous enough when you just say it, but not being able to get your breath is one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had.
To be honest, the whole experience was fairly innocuous for me, weirdly, and it wasn't until I came through it that I realized, they kind of told me that it was more serious than I thought at the time. But
so you were just manifesting shortness of breath and fever and went to the emergency room.
Yeah, I had a cough and some minor things. And what happens, they give you these drugs and then they monitor you very closely. And it's not like chemo where you get sick and you throw up and that, the stereotypical things that people assume with cancer treatment. It's none of that. To all onlookers, you look perfectly healthy and normal. And that's another discussion, but it's difficult to look healthy and not feel healthy. But
really?
Well, yeah, I mean, if someone presents with the general, physical attributes of someone on chemo,
right.
People know that you're going through something, for better or for worse. You can tell when you see someone who's on chemo, that they're on chemo. You don't have to ask, hey, what's wrong? You don't have to have a conversation about it for it to be understood. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the way it is. And when you don't present with any symptoms, people assume that you're healthy and you can go to work and you can function as a human. But that completely negates the emotional aspect. It completely, you're tired. It was exhausting.
Right.
And walking was difficult. There was a period where, especially after brain surgery, I went from brain surgery, I had radiation after that, and then I went straight into immunotherapy about a month after my surgery. Yeah. And so I'm still recovering. I'm on anti-seizure medications, which were a nightmare. I was on a lot of steroids, and that's the way they treat when the treatment causes these symptoms, the inflammation. The way of treating those is to pump you full of steroids. And
that's which, like prednisone?
Yep, a lot of prednisone.
Even a little bit of prednisone makes me feel like I've done an entire 8 ball of GAC. It makes me feel completely insane. So yeah. I can't even imagine what it was like to be hammered with prednisone.
Yeah, I think at the high point of it, I think I was on 120 milligrams a day, something like that.
How did that affect your moods?
Oh, it was a nightmare. I would not have wanted to be around me at all during that period. Yeah. I was a horrible person to be around, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's you're moody, you're angry, nothing feels good. You're just on edge the whole time. It's not a pleasant experience at all.
So how long was this course of treatment?
So the first dose put me in this crazy overactive state. My immune system was on overdrive, and I was, all of these symptoms came up within the first couple weeks of starting treatment. And the protocol is that if you are on steroids, they will not give you another dose, and because it'll kill you, basically. And so they gave me the first dose of these immunomodulators, and about a week later, I started presenting with these symptoms, and it took, I think, 9 or 10 weeks for them to wean me off the steroids, so that I could start treatment again. And I was something like a week off. If they hadn't been able to get me off of the steroids in time, they would have stopped treatment altogether. Their protocol was, or is, that if you have this strong of a reaction and we can't stabilize you within, I believe it's 3 months, then you're off the program. Basically, you don't get another dose.
And that's basically a death sentence.
Not necessarily. There are other options, but it's certainly it's not ideal.
Yeah.
And certainly for me, they told me this is the best chance you have at living. And so the thought of not being allowed to continue the drugs that I felt were keeping me alive was terrifying. And so the process was, went for treatment, had the symptoms, got put on a ton of prednisone, and then they would try to lower the prednisone dosage, and I would get a crazy fever again. Okay, well, we got to prednisone's got to go back up. And it was this dance of trying to lower the dosage, and then symptoms would come back, and then, okay, dosage is going back up again. And finally, they got it down to a point where they were willing to treat me again, and they did. But instead of it being the two drugs together, they went to the maintenance dose, which is just, I believe it's the nivolumab, but it's just one of the drugs. And the protocol for that was every 3 weeks for a year. And so that's what we did. And I had other moments where there were, some bad reactions, but generally speaking, it was pretty smooth sailing after that. And that was the whole experience. I was very confused why they wouldn't do surgery on my lungs, and knew nothing about cancer before being thrown into this. And I was like, well, I've got a tumor on my lungs, so you're going to cut that out, right? And they were like, well, if we cut it out, then we don't have anything to monitor, so we won't know if the treatment is working, which is just a weird thought.
That seems like it would bother me, like this awareness that there's this sort of parasitic growth in my lungs.
Yeah, it was very bizarre, and so they monitor you by doing CT and MRI scans, and it's every 3 months. And the first scan that I had post treatment, the first scan after starting the treatment regimen, which was the following August or September, my tumors had shrunk to the point of being non-existent, basically. So that was after 2 doses of immunotherapy.
Wow.
Yeah.
But they persisted for a year, just to be thorough.
Yeah, the protocol of the treatment is that you do 4 doses of the combination, of which they were able to give me 1, and then it's followed by a year of the maintenance dose. And they think in my case that probably the tumors were gone within a few, like a month or 2 after I started treatment. Like it was. Yeah. I had a very good reaction to the drugs, and the fact that I had the side effects that I did was indicative of the fact that my body was actually doing what it was meant to do, and the drugs were ramping up my immune system, and I was having the response that they wanted. They don't really tell you that ahead of time. It's not something that they can really admit to, but they were not sad that I was having these experiences.
So you did the treatment for a year. You told me before we started the call that you had head, lung, you had scans this week, and everything's still clear.
Yep.
It's been 5 years?
No, it's been 3 years. It was 3 years. 3 years in April since I was diagnosed and had surgery. This coming August will be the 2-year anniversary of me stopping treatment. And I still get monitored pretty closely. I'm scanned every 3 months, and I meet with my oncologist every 3 months. And but things are looking good. They told me the same statistic that you mentioned, which was if we were to do nothing with the diagnosis that I had, then I would have 6 months. So the fact that we're talking 3 years later is pretty incredible.
So what was, I guess the low point is this, when you got the diagnosis and you were left alone in the room, but I have a feeling that there was probably a big emotional journey through that course of treatment over the year. Can you talk about that some?
Yeah. I didn't recognize it at the time. I didn't realize that I was maybe experiencing some things that I needed to get off of my chest. It's funny looking back at it, but I just kind of I thought I could work it out myself. Genevieve went and got counseling. She various services for cancer patients and their loved ones, anyone dealing with a cancer diagnosis in their family. They offer counseling free of charge, and they help out with various aspects of living with cancer. So she went and she had a group therapy that she went to for caregivers, and she urged me to get some help as well. She knew that I was dealing with some stuff and didn't really, I would talk to her about it, but there were a lot of things that maybe I didn't want to burden loved ones with. And so she urged me to go and get some help. So I went and I did both group and individual therapy at Cancer Care, and worked through a lot of things and learned a lot about myself, both cancer related and otherwise, that I didn't really know I needed to work through.
Yeah, I mean, the entire time I've known you, you've had a fairly dry wit and very low key affect, and sometimes that's indicative of some long term depression. But I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so like, what sort of self discovery did you experience in the Cancer Care therapy sessions?
Well, I didn't know that I had. I think I would. I didn't know that there was a problem, so just the fact that I was able to come to the realization that I wasn't okay, that was probably the most important thing that they were able to give to me. The experience of being in a group, and it was a young adult group. It was not melanoma specific. It was all types of cancer, and there were many different kind of outlooks in that group. There were some people who were stage 1 and had a very good outlook, and there were people who were on the verge of death. And being in a room with those people and laughing and crying and doing things that come with that experience was very valuable to me. And I didn't realize quite how much I needed that until I went and did that. The individual therapy was important too, but I think it was really the group aspect that allowed me to then, when I was in the individual therapy, I could kind of work through the things that came to the surface during those group sessions.
Are you in touch with the people that you were in group with still?
I am, yeah. We have a Facebook group, and we keep in touch that way. It's not terribly active. I think it's hard to want to revisit some of that stuff, especially if you're doing well. But we do keep in touch and try to keep tabs on each other and see how everyone's doing.
Yeah.
But it's tough. I mean, the nature of it, there have been people who have passed away, and that's difficult. It's hard to live with that, and it's hard to understand why that might happen, and I'm still here and they're not. So, yeah.
So you have some survivor's guilt then?
Yeah, I definitely do. Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
I'm not sure I do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever will. I don't know. I'm not. Therapy gave me some tools, and that was my goal in it. I actually went through 2 cycles. The first counselor that I worked with was great at listening, but I didn't. They don't teach you how to go through therapy. No one tells you. It's not the nature of it. There's no roadmap. So everyone's different, and everyone needs something different out of therapy. And the first therapist that I had was very good at listening, and he wasn't very good at giving me tools to work past the thing. So I would go, and we saw each other, I believe every week. It was every other week. Anyway, we saw each other on a regular basis. And I found that we were just saying the same thing over and over again. I would go, and he would say, "What's bothering you?" And I would tell him, and it would just be the same thing week after week. And nothing was resolving. Nothing was getting fixed. It was just, here I am doing this thing.
Yeah, I've said a lot of times on this program that, like, your first therapy experience is seldom a good one, because it's just like your first band. It just kind of sucks. You don't really know how to be in the room yet,
No, you don't. And I didn't realize until it was over that, I didn't actually grow in this at all. I didn't learn anything. I didn't fix anything. I'm still just as stressed out and upset about this as I was when I started.
Yeah.
So they gave me they gave me the opportunity to do another cycle, which they don't normally provide. It's normally one cycle for free, and then I think you can choose to pay if you want to keep going. But they recognized that I wasn't where I needed to be, and they gave me another shot with a different counselor, and that went much better. And I didn't, there's no explaining this. There's no explaining cancer to anyone. It doesn't make any sense. It's not something that you can come to an agreement about. It's just awful for everybody, and it doesn't matter how good your outlook is. It's a lifelong struggle, and it's never going to go away for anybody who's been diagnosed. Until you die, it will be there, and that's hard to come to terms with. It's, for me right now, my outlook's good, but nobody knows if that's going to change. Nobody knows anything, and that uncertainty was not something I really understood until I went through this process and talked with various people. And life is an uncertain thing, and a cancer diagnosis is no different. But it's not. Life goes on, and there are other things that I want to spend my time thinking about, and I want to experience. And I can't change what may happen. I don't know. I might live another 50 years and never have another tumor that entire time. I might go for my next scan and they might tell me that I'm terminal. There's no, it's just what it is.
Right.
And
it's uncertain.
Yeah.
So how's that changed your outlook about your day-to-day life?
I don't let stress bother me anymore.
Yeah.
Nothing, especially work-related stress. That's not to say I don't get stressed. It's a natural thing. But I don't have time for bullshit, to be frank about it. I don't have time for anyone's problems that aren't important. I was late for work or whatever it may be.
Right.
Someone yelled at me on the street, or my coffee wasn't quite right this morning, or whatever. Things that bother people and bother me. I've stopped caring so much about those things, and I try to let go of the things. I'm not very good at it still. I hold on to my anger, and I'm not very good at letting go of that. And but I'm trying. That's really, I'm actively trying to live in the moment and to enjoy myself and to recognize that I'm lucky to get to do the things that I get to do. And as much as I don't always enjoy the work that I'm doing, or I don't, I often wish that I was doing bigger and better things, whatever that may be. It's not what's important anymore.
Right.
And I'm trying to just kind of let go of those things that people hold on to, that don't matter at the end of the day. They really don't.
Yeah. The anger thing is tough because it's hard to, when you've been given, at some point in your life, you've been given a diagnosis that could potentially kill you. For me, sort of working backwards through anger is recognizing the things that I'm afraid of that make me angry. Like, anger is just fear turned inside out. And
sure.
I think for me, I can't speak to it because I haven't had the diagnosis, but it would be very hard for me to not live with a lot of anxiety, which would manifest itself if my personal history is any indication of how I would handle it. I would be angry a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tend to be that type of person as well. I tend to be kind of a grump, and I think I don't necessarily see myself that way, but I understand that a lot of people see me that way. I think I'm the token curmudgeon for a lot of people. And I've recognized these patterns in myself that I didn't really recognize before going through therapy. And that was really eye-opening, to be kind of like, oh, well, yeah, I'm kind of negative about a lot of things, and I still am, now. And I'm actively trying not to be, but it's very difficult when you've lived your entire life kind of focusing on the negative.
I mean, it's kind of a
not
chicken and egg argument, right? Was I a negative person before I got into punk rock, or did punk rock make me a negative person?
Sure. And, going back to my family life, it's kind of bizarre because a lot of my friends growing up, when I got into punk rock and I got into loud music in general, I was about 15 or 16, I think, something around then when, actually it was earlier than that. I was around 13 when I started listening to punk rock. And I had I was very angry. I was a very angry teenager. I don't know why, because again, my family life was incredible. I always have had a good relationship with my parents. I have had everything that a person could want, but really it wasn't a choice. I think that there's a thing that happens when you hit puberty and you go through all these things that people go through. I was just angry, and it wasn't at anything in particular, but I was angry, and loud music gave me a way of expressing that. And
I mean, you were sort of the token working class kid in a very wealthy school, and I could see how some of the inequity that you witness is just being a part of that dynamic could make you a little cynical.
Yeah, I don't think I really knew that was happening. I definitely fostered those feelings in me, but I don't think I understood why. Like I'd never pointed a finger at anybody. I mean, I had friends from all walks of life, rich, poor, whatever. I didn't really, I didn't care who anyone, I didn't care about financial backgrounds or anything like that. It wasn't important to me.
Right.
But I certainly, you can't help but recognize it when you're in those situations. But I think it was more subconscious for me. And it's certainly my anger towards inequality and things like that were never directed at anyone. It wasn't like, oh, I hate you because you're rich. It was more, I dislike the fact that some people have more money than other people.
Right.
And yeah, so I was angry, but it wasn't at anything. It was weird.
Right. No, I get it, man. I had a sort of nebulous anger from a very young age, although I can kind of point to some of the causes in my life. But it's not my interview. So how has this sort of surviving cancer sort of affected that general experience of anger for you?
Well, I was during treatment. I went to a psychologist, and he kind of diagnosed me with anxiety, which is pretty obvious based on my situation. I think I have a history of depression and anxiety in my family, but it never occurred to me that maybe that would be passed on to me. And I still don't think that I'm clinically depressed. I do have anxiety, but I don't think it's not acute in the way that some people deal with. But I was put on lorazepam to deal with the anxiety of going and getting scanned, and that was the first time that I'd been given medication for a mental issue, and I really didn't like it. I don't like the way that it makes me feel.
Lorazepam's part of the diazepam family, right? It's more of a sedative than a SSRI.
Yeah, it's Ativan is the brand name, but
Okay.
it's a benzodiazepine, and it basically just numbs you. And
Yeah.
I was on a fairly low dosage, but it was enough it took away the symptoms. I wasn't anxious, but it
Right.
took away something else as well. And I wasn't taking it regularly. It's not something that I was prescribed on a daily basis, but it was, if you're having issues, then take one and it will go away. And it did. But it also, that was partly what encouraged me to go into therapy, because I didn't enjoy the fact that I was taking a drug to treat the symptoms of an underlying problem, and I wanted to fix the problem.
Right.
And so that was what therapy was for, basically.
Did they put you on an SSRI? at
Nope.
all?
No, my psychologist wanted me to go on antidepressants.
Right.
I watched my dad go through depression and anxiety when I was younger, and he took various different antidepressants, and he had a rough time with those.
It can be it can be bad.
Yeah, I don't think they ever quite got his dosage right, and in fact, he's now learned that it's more of an anxiety problem for him than it is depression, and they were trying to treat depression. And
well, if they treat it with something like Prozac, then you get all zoomy, and now your anxiety is really out of control.
Yeah, and there were periods growing up where he would have days where he wouldn't get out of bed, and I didn't really understand that, and I didn't know what that meant. I didn't, do you have a cold? No. Well, why can't you get out of bed? What's the big deal? And so I saw that experience with my dad, and I didn't want to get put on antidepressants, even if they might help me, because I didn't want to lose part of me or get worse or whatever. I had fear about it.
Yeah. I mean, I could see like heading into this insane roller coaster of a year of immunotherapy treatment. Like, look, I know I have low grade depression, and it's something that I'm comfortable with. I don't really want to start throwing things at that problem while I'm dealing with this other thing. I mean,
yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, I understand that. So you got a clean bill of health this morning.
Yeah.
And you and Genevieve are hanging in there.
Yeah, we're great. Everything is really fantastic right now. It's been quite the ride, but it's been calm now for a couple of years. I mean, it's been just going through the motions of getting scanned, and there's the anxiety that comes with that every few months when it comes up of, are we going to have to start this process again? And right. And I think that's the hardest part for me is thinking, okay, it took a long time for me to recover from my surgery. It took a long time for me to recover from the treatment that I was given, both physically and mentally. It's a process that was very intense, and it took a long time. And the thought of having to start at square one with that again, that's the part that scares me. The cancer part is scary, and there's that aspect of like, will it kill me, etc. There's the health related things, but that isn't the part that actually scares me. The part that scares me is I don't know if I could go through the mental and physical ordeal again.
Yeah. Seems like you're living the life that you want to live. Like, I mean, a lot of people get a cancer diagnosis and they get through treatment and they're like, man, I don't want to be an accountant anymore. I'm going to open a coffee shop, or I'm going to write a novel or whatever. But you were already kind of on your path of this work that you do and do so well. But if you could go back and talk to the Richard sitting in the hospital room that had just gotten this diagnosis, is there anything that you would tell yourself?
Oh, man. The thing that's become clear to me through all of this is that it's an experience. Life is made up of experiences, and this is one of them. And for better or for worse, I've had that experience, and not that many people have it. So it's made me a different person. I won't say better or worse, but it's made me a different person. And I value that. I value that experience. It's a bizarre thing to say. But what is life? What are we all doing here? This is just something that we're all part of, but nobody really knows why. Nobody knows what's next. Nobody knows anything beyond our current existence. And, this was just part of it for me. And I tried while I was going through it, and therapy helped with this, but I tried to just experience it as an experience, and not really read into it too much beyond that. And if I could go back and tell myself anything, it would just be to live each moment as it comes, and not try to think too far in the future about what's going to happen, because nobody really knows.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad things are working out, and because it was pretty scary hearing about these things, via social media and stuff, and also not wanting to kind of intrude. Like, one of my experiences with my mom's illness was that there would be people who would sort of pop up, and it was often they needed a lot of consoling and a lot of, like, I saw my mom's limited energy when she was in hospice care wasted telling people who could have probably, kind of maintained their own emotional lives, that not to worry, that things were going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to burden you and Genevieve with my concerns, but I'm really glad that you're getting consistent, clean scans, and that you guys are doing well.
Yeah, I would say it's luck, but honestly, the medical care that I've received, I can't imagine anything better. I was at NYU. I've been at NYU for this entire ordeal. The ER that I went to was NYU, and that was actually at the urging of Tony and Mike, who, when I got in the ambulance, they told the ambulance to go to NYU, not to go to Woodhull, which is the hospital closest to the studio. They said, go to NYU, and that's what I did. And that one decision, that one instruction to the ambulance driver, changed my entire outlook, I think, honestly. The doctor, the neurologist who performed the radio surgery, which is basically they put you in this machine, they immobilize your head, and they put you in a machine, and they shoot your head with radiation in a very targeted manner. The neurologist who performed that procedure helped design the machine that he used to do the procedure.
It's like having that's like having Les Paul set up your guitar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that type of thing doesn't happen in, I don't know, many
Iowa.
other places. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I hate to speak ill of other places. It's something that I've recognized I do, and it's a very entitled outlook. But the care that I receive in the city is something that I don't take for granted. And the people, all of my doctors are at the top of their game. They're all leaders in their field. They all are very, very, very good doctors. And I am very confident that without them, I would be dead. And that's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm super grateful for all of them and for you. We usually wind these interviews up with a series of 8 questions that I've sort of hammered out over the course of these 16 interviews. And they're based loosely on the Bernard Pivot questions. He was a French radio host, and they're the questions that they used to in the Actors Studio. I don't know if you've ever watched those interviews, but I came up with my own questions because everyone sort of has preconceived notions about how they would answer those other questions.
Sure.
If you're ready, we can jump into those.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. First question. What is the fondest memory you have of a meal that you've had?
Ooh, that's a tough one because I like to eat, and a lot of the traveling that I do with Genevieve, a lot of our focus is on food, and so that's a tough one to answer. But
it's funny because when I met you, you were a pretty strict vegetarian, completely strict vegetarian.
Yeah, that didn't last too long.
Yeah, but I remember that, like, you were the one when we were trying to. Somebody said something in the studio in the control room one day, and I said, that might be the grimmest 3 words I've ever heard in my life. And I can't remember what the person said, but then you, without missing a beat, said, well, what about vegan potluck?
Yeah.
Like, you win, man. That's pretty grim.
Yeah. The fondest memory of the meal, it's probably after after I asked Genevieve to marry me, we went to a little cafe near Portland, Maine, and I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember what I ate. I don't remember the name of the place. I don't remember really where it was. I do remember that I was feeling very odd. This was at the height of the symptoms that I was having right before I was diagnosed. And I remember feeling pretty weird, but just the incredible happiness that I had, that I was going to get married to my best friend, and the knowledge that we were starting a life together made that meal the best thing that I can remember.
That's the sort of the soul of this question is often about who we sit down and take a break from work with to enjoy something that is like sensually pleasing,
Yep.
And sometimes it's not really about the food. It's
I find
exactly
often
as you described.
Yeah, often it's the food is just there, and
yeah,
I've certainly had better meals. I mean, I've been very lucky to eat at some incredible restaurants, and I've had food that is very, very good. But rarely does that stick in my mind the way that experiences do.
Right. Second question: what is a time you've been braver than you ever thought you could be?
Well, I don't know if I'd see myself as a brave person. I actually think I'm fairly cowardly. But I don't know. I kind of, I do the things that I need to do at a given moment, and try to get through them. And I don't know if it would be bravery per se. It's just, what other choice do I have? A lot of people, after I had surgery and went through treatment and whatnot, that was a word that was thrown around a lot, and I don't see it that way. What the fuck else was I supposed to do? Die?
Right.
You're giving me two options. I can do what you're telling me I need to do to live, or I can give up and die. And I don't particularly like either one, but I don't want to die. So I guess we'll do the other one. And
right.
I don't know. I that's kind of, I don't think it's bravery. I think it's necessity.
Yeah. Third question: what is something you've lost that you regret losing the most in your life?
That's an easier one. I wish that I could listen to music the way that I used to be able to listen to music. It's very difficult for me to listen to music now without judging something about it. Mostly sonically, I have a hard time listening to things that I don't enjoy the sound of. The song, a lot of people say that, well, a great song doesn't matter what it's recorded like. If it's a great song, it's great. And I agree, but I have a hard time getting past that. Especially with more modern recordings that could be great based on the fact that everyone has access to great equipment these days. And going back to what I said earlier about not having the chance to make a record more than once, I think it's really a bummer to me when I hear something that I really enjoy, but I can't get past the sound of it. So I wish I could just listen to things and enjoy them for what they are, instead of nitpicking and turning my engineer brain on and going, oh, how would I have done this differently, or any of those things. I would just love to be able to listen to music and enjoy it, instead of, and that's not to say I don't enjoy music anymore, but it's different. And I've had to, I'm training myself out of that somewhat. But it's really hard to switch off the engineer brain in me. There
was a burst of indie recordings from like 6 years ago that I remember just being like, well, I guess the new sound of indie rock is out of phase overheads. It's just so frustrating. Everything sounded so bad for a minute, but I think that maybe people are starting to realize that the bedroom studio can be a 3-year album making process, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And they're starting.
It can go either way. It's amazing now that you can, spend $100. And I mean, people are making records on an iPhone now. You can multi-track on an iPhone. That's crazy. So the wealth of music that exists now is huge, but it's also it's harder to sift through some of that. And there's positives and negatives to all of it, because in the height of commercial music in the late 90s and early 2000s, when budgets were insane and studios were still important and functioning on a high level, a lot of the records that came out were garbage in terms of art, but sonically were incredible. And now I think there are a lot of very artistic records being made, and very interesting bands that are making great music, but they're doing it in a way that I don't really understand, and it's not for me. So I have a hard time listening to it. And
right.
It's pretty common in Brooklyn, especially because costs are so high here. And, going to a studio is not a cheap endeavor.
No.
And so a lot of people record in basements or practice rooms, and they make great music, and it just sounds terrible to me.
Yeah.
But people love it, and people connect on an emotional level to that. And I'm learning that that's what's important. And just because I don't understand it, or it doesn't give me that emotional response, doesn't mean that it's any less valid to the people making it or the people consuming it. But yeah, it's a bit frustrating to me, especially because, like you said, it can become like a 3-year process of spinning your wheels and chasing your tail, when you could just go and spend a week at a great studio with someone who knows what they're doing and come up with something that a lot of people would consider better. And you probably wouldn't spend as much money as you think doing it, because it's more efficient.
That's why I love recording the tape. It's just got to be right, man. Just got to play it right. Just play it right. You're sort of forced by the medium to act on your emotional impulse, rather than spend 3 weeks navel gazing at a guitar solo. Just do the thing. But I respect some people who need to kind of overwork that dough until it's a thing,
Well, kind of going back to my feeling of trying to understand how to interact with other people and how to go through life in a more positive manner. It's not my decision. It's not my decision to say how you should record your song. It's your song.
Yeah, well, it's the band Pavement taught me that just because I don't like something doesn't mean it's not good.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that band, but people live and die based on that band. So
and what, if I ever have children, whatever my children listen to is going to be awful. And I'm sure what I listen to, my parents think is awful. It's the way of things, because it's not what you're accustomed to hearing, and you're not used to it. But that doesn't mean that it's more or less valid. It's so personal, and it's such a bizarre thing to me when people shame other people for, and I do it. I'm not saying that I don't do this, but when I actually sit down and think about it, it's such a bizarre thing to shame someone for their preference in anything in life, but especially something art related, because there's no right or wrong. There's no correct way to do anything. So if you have an emotional attachment to something, who am I to take that away from you?
I do remember, though, that like this, as we were sort of pondering the grimmest 3 words imaginable after vegan potluck, you did mention Dream Theater cover band.
Yeah, I stand by that. I really dislike that band.
All right, next question. Tell me about an act of kindness you received from a stranger.
The nurse that I mentioned who came in after the first nurse left my room, that was profound to me. The fact that he took the time to recognize that I was suffering and that I was scared and didn't know what was going on. He had no obligation to talk to me at all. He came in to check my vitals, and he didn't have to say anything to me at all. And he took the time to sit down and explain that, this wasn't the end.
For many years, 5/8 would go to New York City in the 90s, and that was sort of before everything turned around and gentrified and became a much safer, more sane place.
Yep.
And I was sitting in a pizzeria near Alphabet City it's near Brownies. I don't know if that place is even still there, but there was a club called Brownies right next to the park there. And on the other side of the park was Alphabet City, which at the time was the sort of open air drug market, and sort of hobbyist murderer kind of zone of New York City. Sure. And there was a police officer standing in the pizzeria, and he was standing in line, and I was just watching him stand there, and he had this 1,000-yard stare thing going, and I turned to Sean, the guitar player, and I said, "Look at that guy, man." And he said, "I got a feeling that being a police officer in New York City is just like being on acid all the time." Like you just see things that don't make any sense all the time because it's this enormous pressure cooker of 8 million people.
Yeah.
And so when you were talking about the nurse who said, "I can't speak to that," like I imagine that being in any of the helping professions in New York City is just so intense that it takes a special person to come back to the room and go, "Hey, I used to work in neurology, and if this was like critical, you'd already be in a room, you know, you'd already be in surgery." And that's a special. I felt a tremendous gratitude just hearing you talk about that person was there, because that's not part of the job description in a city of 8 million people when you're dealing with everything that you deal with in New York City emergency rooms.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about crazy. Like I didn't live in New York when things were rough. I've never experienced living in a place that was actually dangerous. I live in a very safe place, and I've never felt even slightly. I mean, I'm also a white guy, so like I don't really have a lot to be afraid of. But I've never felt unsafe in this city, and the stuff that I saw just sitting in the ER the various times that I went in, like, yeah, you see those people, that's where they end up. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. You mean when you say those people, where they end up, you mean the people who are unfortunate enough to get sort of caught up in the intersections of need and violence.
Yeah, I mean, I saw drug users. I saw victims of violent crime come through while I was sitting there. I saw everything. I saw a Hasidic man who went into cardiac arrest, and they put him in a room, and there was a whole entourage with him. Like everything that you can imagine goes through the ERs in New York, and I'm sure most big cities. So just sitting there, I mean, most of the time when I was in the ER, it was pretty passive. They would put an IV drip in and wait. They would do tests to make sure I didn't have an infection or something. That was the funniest thing about the whole experience, to be honest. These drugs that I was on had only existed for a few years before I was given them, and they'd only been approved for general use for less than a year. So the nurses that I was seeing in the ER had no idea what these drugs even were. And so I would come in with this fever of 104.5 or whatever, crazy high fever. And they would just assume I had some terrible infection, because that's the only thing that causes a fever like that. Yeah.
Because your body's immune response to
exactly.
Infection. So, yeah.
So,
okay. I get it.
They would, I would go in, I would tell them exactly what was happening. I would give them my oncologist's name and number, and they would check in with them, and eventually it would all kind of be fine. But in the meantime, the protocol was to do a full workup of, infection tests and all that sort of thing. So a lot of the time I would be sitting there waiting for test results before they would discharge me, and I'd be on an IV, and I'd just be sitting there. I wasn't doing anything. It wasn't critical. Nothing was happening. I was just waiting to go home, basically. And so I would watch patients come in and out, and you see a lot of things. So I can only imagine as a nurse or a doctor in the city, the stuff that you are exposed to. It's got to be pretty crazy.
Day. Yeah. What's your favorite place to normally this question is, what's your favorite place to gig? Because mostly I talk to musicians, but you've got a whole special set of circumstances as a recording engineer. So I'm just going to change it slightly to, what is your favorite place to work in your artistic field?
The B room at Studio G is my absolute favorite place to record. It's just fantastic for what I like, and it's very easy for me to get results that I like from that room. Speaking in a tracking sense, especially, and I'll expand the question to the live aspect as well, because I do a fair amount of live mixing, and the two places that I've really enjoyed are I believe it's Saturn in Birmingham.
Saturn Bar, yeah.
That place is great. And Music Hall of Williamsburg is my favorite venue in the city. Both to work at and to see a show.
Cool. Next question. Visa and income considerations aside, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
Well, of the many places in the world, I haven't been to very many, so I really only feel comfortable saying the places I have been, but I love living in New York, truly. I really enjoy it here, and I have no desire to live anywhere else, but if I needed to go somewhere else, it would be London. That's the only other place that I've been that really feels comfortable to me.
Yeah. Do you know about that studio in the south of France, the Black Box Studio?
I don't.
It was up for sale a few years ago and somebody bought it, or maybe they just needed a house engineer. The house engineer had been there forever past, or I can't remember, but it was a part of me that was like, oh God, what a beautiful studio. But it's also, I'm rural, right? Like if you said, do you want to live in New York, London, or in like in the middle of the country in the south of France, I'm going to pick the third one every time because I'm not really, I like urban life in short doses, small doses.
You're a country boy though. That's it.
Yeah. Next question. What is your perfect instrument? And do you own it? And I would expand that question, since your craft is also recording. Is there a perfect microphone or piece of outboard gear that is just the thing that you love? And do you actually own a piece of that equipment?
So the longer I do this, the less I care about gear, which I guess I'm happy about. Before coming to Georgia and working with you and using the various mics and things that Jim has at 1093, I'd never heard any of those things. So I didn't, you hear, if you have a U47 or something, then you'll make great music, and it's not really the way it works. But now at this point in my life, if it makes sound come out the other end of it, I'm fine. It'll be all right. But
that U47 was pretty good.
Yeah, I always liked the 67 that he had better.
Also, pretty great mic.
Not a terrible thing at all.
Right. I have to choose between those two.
I'm pretty sad that I don't have an RE15 or two, and now they're really expensive for what they are. So, and not really worth the asking price, in my opinion. But instrument-wise, I have an Acrolite that I bought at your urging, and that is still that's my favorite instrument that I own, and will often record it over many other instruments. It's kind of fallen into a tuning right now, and I've had the same head on it for a long time, and I've had it at the same tuning for a long time. I have lug locks on it, actually the ones that you turned me on to, and I don't touch it really, and it just does a thing that I really like, and I kind of vary the amount of dampening on it based on what I want, and that's really all I do. So that, in terms of instruments that I own, that's the one that I like the most.
For those of you who aren't like snare drum nerds like Richard and I, the Ludwig Acrolite is the student model snare drum they've made since the mid 60s or late 60s, and it's sort of flat gray. Like if you grab the average civilian by the lapels and go, imagine a snare drum in your mind. That's pretty much the most basic snare drum imaginable, but also something about the thinness of the aluminum shell and the 8 lugs, and there's just something about the Ludwig Acrolite that makes it one of the most flexible recording drums I've ever owned, and I feel like every drummer should have one.
it is pretty temperamental about how you hit it, I will say.
That's also true. But it's very thin, right? So the amount of force you deliver to it, if you hit it too hard, it's going to choke because it's such a light drum.
Yeah, it turns into all stick attack and nothing else at that point, and it's not particularly flattering. In the situations where that fails me, I go to a superphonic, which if it's not one of those two, I don't know what to do at that point. There are other things that I like snare drum wise, but if I can't get what I want out of a 5.5 by 14 acrolite or superphonic, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. So last question. And I haven't found exactly the right words to phrase this question, so bear with me if it gets a little airy-fairy. But just imagine a taxi that can go anywhere in space or time, isn't constrained by sort of how we understand the linear passage of time. And you get into this taxi and you say to the driver, "Hey, man, take me home." Where are you going?
It's more of a time than a place, I think. I wish that I had been around and of the kind of, I wish I was in my early 20s in the 90s. Most of the music that I gravitate towards now and, kind of the pinnacle of recording budget and technology. I wish I had been around for that. I don't care too much about cities, although I'd still go New York or London at that point. But yeah, there was something that happened where people still were making money off of music, and record labels were still paying people to make music in nice studios, and those studios were well maintained, and the gear was at an age where it still functioned pretty reliably. And the rooms that had been around since the 70s were still being used, and the talent that was around on the engineering side was pretty incredible too. I wish that I could have seen some of that.
I experienced a lot of that. That's when sort of 5/8 was having money thrown at the band, and we got to make records at brilliant studios in San Francisco, and we got to make a record with Ed Stasium at Triclops Studio in Atlanta. And those are big analog boards with tape machines. And it was fun. I will say that, it was pretty magical going into an enormous live room and setting up a drum kit and having someone like Ed Stasium, who, produced every other Ramones record and the first 3 Talking Heads records and was an engineering assistant to Phil Spector, come in and put the mics up and then track and walk into the control room and hear sounds that sounded like the records that I loved, like those Ramones records or any of the big rock records of my youth. To have someone at the control in the control room at the board, like driving the music towards those sounds it was pretty miraculous.
Yeah, I think that's something that's missed these days with the home recording or the whatever you want to call it, non-studio recording. You don't have that experience of going in for the first listen and hearing it come back kind of the way that you've heard so many other things come back.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty magical experience, because it doesn't, sitting behind a drum kit and playing it sounds one way, and it's great feeling and it sounds great, but that's not what records sound like. It's not, generally speaking, what records sound like.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not a sound that I personally gravitate towards. I know that that's a style that some people strive for, but I'm personally all about, if I can make something sound cool and interesting and not natural necessarily, like what's natural? It's all just sound. It's all just music. Like who's to say that a drum machine is any less natural than, a perfectly tuned 70s 3-ply kit or something? It doesn't.
Right.
Prince records wouldn't be Prince records if they were done the way that Beatles records were done. And I think that's something that's being lost a little bit with the advent of these non-traditional recording situations. It's not an event anymore, and bands don't have that pressure and excitement, however you want to view it, because certainly some people feel positively about it and some people feel negatively about it. But the experience of being in a studio where there's a lot of money at stake, and you're spending, this is your one shot to make your art the way that you want to make it. That's getting lost a little bit, I think, and it's a bit of a shame that a lot of people will never have that experience of hearing what really, really, really good gear and a good room and someone who knows what they're doing with all of those things, what that can sound like. And that's a bummer.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I think there's still a good bit of that happening in Nashville.
There's still a good bit of it happening everywhere. I mean, it's certainly, I work at what I would consider to be a world-class recording studio, and I see records getting made every single day that are still being done the way that they have been for decades. We still do a lot of live recording. We still record to tape. But we also do it other ways now.
Yeah.
But it still exists. It's still pretty common, but now it's people coming in for a couple days to do basics, and then maybe they take those tracks away and they overdub in their basement, and they add some 500 layers of guitars or whatever they want to do, and then they come back and do a mix in a studio or not.
Right.
But it's a couple days instead of a couple months, and that's a pretty different way of working.
Chase Park got a Neve console.
Yes, they did. They got a 5316, which is what we have in the B room at Studio G.
Yeah. It's you can still come to Athens and make a great record.
I intend to do that.
Yeah.
I saw you. What was it? Last year, the last time I saw you down there, I came and did a record there. It was last year. Anyway.
Yeah. I really appreciate you doing this. This has been great.
Well, I appreciate you asking me to.
Yeah. I know that the last few years have been kind of existentially tough. Being sick is so difficult. I'm glad that you're out of the woods for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, me too. I will say that you were talking about how people approach people with a sickness or whatever it may be, personal issues, and you said not wanting to bother me and things like that, which I appreciate. But to anyone listening, if you have any questions for me, or if you want to know anything about anything that I've been through, if you're going through something yourself, I am 100% an open book, and you cannot offend me asking any question about anything that I've experienced. I am 100% willing to talk about it. And if you have medical issues that you're dealing with, or if you've been diagnosed with cancer or know someone who has, feel free to reach out. My email is on my website, and I'm very willing to talk about anything at all. You will not offend me.
I'll put a link to your website in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So anybody wants to not only hear what Richard's done as an engineer and producer, but also to get in touch, that you can get there through the show notes on this episode. Well, thanks again, man.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our interview with Richard Salino. That's one of my favorite people in the world. He is such a talented audio engineer and such a good guy. So thanks again for listening. Remember, if you're having a tough time and you need someone to talk to, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 1-800-273-8255. It's 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. It's staffed by trained volunteers. Some of the best people in the world are on the other end of that line. 1-800-273-8255. In the meantime, be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself. Ask for help if you need it. Support local music. Go see your favorite band. And remember that loud guitars save lives.